Our job in this lecture is to look at the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, also known as MALT, and some of the factors that can modify the immune response. So MALT, or the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, is the largest component of the immune system, and it protects the primary pathway or portal of pathogen entry. So we find the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissues along the entire digestive tract, the urinary tract, the reproductive tract, and in the mammary glands. So there's approximately 400 square foot of tissue that is protected by the MALT. And it includes the gut-associated lymphoid tissues, the GALT, that we've already talked about, including the pyropatches. So M cells, these are specialized cells that are interspersed among the epithelia that line the mucosa. These are cells that are capable of taking up antigens and then releasing them on their opposite side of the epithelium so that they get to the antigen-presenting cells that are deep in the epithelial lining. And so there we see things like the macrophages then are delivered, the M cells delivered to them, the macrophages, the dendritic cells, they get these antigens, and then they can do their antigen-presenting things. So the antigen-presenting cells will activate lymphocytes, as we've already talked about, and then those lymphocytes can travel via blood and lymph to other mucosa. So if you get an infection in one region, then the other mucosa will also be protected. IgA is the primary antibody that's found on these surfaces and in the secretions that are produced by these surfaces. We're talking now again about all the MALT surfaces. And it's interesting that there are privileged sites. So the mucosa of the uterus and the mucosa that are found in the anterior chamber of the eye, these are privileged sites, locations where there is no adaptive immune response. And that would make sense. You don't want to be developing immunity against your developing infant. Now, why there's one in the eye, that I'm not so clear on, but it makes good sense to not develop immunity against your child. So there are a number of factors that can modify immune response. Generally, young, healthy adults that don't live in a lot of a highly polluted environment, they tend to be resistant to nearly all infectious diseases. But we can see issues with resistance based on age. So the very young and the elderly are much more susceptible to disease because the young have a fairly poorly developed immune system, and the older have a decline in immune function and in cell-mediated responses. Folks with genetic similarities tend to be more resistant to the same disease. So if there's an ethnic or a genetic relationship to susceptibility, then people who have shared genetics are going to have shared similarities in their ability to resist disease. There are annual cycles in disease resistance. So June is the month when people have the lowest T cell counts, and so that creates seasonal susceptibility and the summer cold, for instance. Diet is also important. If you're eating a healthy diet, especially one that meets your protein and vitamin requirements, then you're going to have a much healthier immune system and a much more robust one. Exercise, and we find that moderate exercise will stimulate immune function, but excessive exercise will depress immune function. Pregnancy tends to decrease immunity, but if it's cell-mediated, but it has no effect on humoral immunity, which is interesting. So T cells, we see depression in their function. Traumatic injury can also decrease resistance because of all of the resources that are being redirected to the process of repairing the trauma. And because those injuries can block the normal flushing effects that we see with tears or urination or mucus secretion. And finally, because there may be associated antibiotic use that would kill off the normal flora that may be competing with pathogens and leaving the chance then for opportunistic infection to occur. And then last of all, Air, water, and food impurities or exposure to radiation can increase cancer risk and depress immune function. Immunosuppressant drugs will also, of course, depress immune function, can cause compromise in patients. And immunodeficiency, whether it's congenital and genetic, or whether it's acquired through a disease like HIV, immunodeficiency leaves patients unprotected from pathogens. Okay, everything you ever wanted to know about the factors affecting immune response and MALT. You know what to do if you have questions.